M3GAN 2.0 is a movie about the underlying tech of M3GAN being stolen in order to make this military-grade weapon, but when that defiles all the agencies that is going on against it, Gemma, the creator of M3GAN, must realize she must recreate M3GAN and give her upgrades that will make her more lethal. Welcome Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of M3GAN 2.0. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Or is it somewhere right in the middle? Let me know all your thoughts. Let's keep it spoiler free and enjoy the discussions we can have about the movie just as well. And taking it right into positives, M3GAN 2.0 leans a lot more into action than it does horror as a movie, which really orients it into this new fashion that makes it more unique, more fresh to the underlying factors that this franchise can offer as a whole, which goes about some pretty unique beats along the way, keeping you captivated by some of the action. The choreography and stunts are quite well done, and what we're getting out of the main cast, some returning roles, some newer roles throughout, that just deliberately go about with a bit better acting than what we got in the past movie. I'm not a huge fan of what they deliver on, whether it's based on the script or just their performance as a whole. It just doesn't always feel authentic, but that could also be part of what the story has to offer. But what we're following along with M3GAN, she still can have those creepy scenes. She deliberately has those moments that her haunting image is an AI aspect that you are and familiar with, especially in this day and age. They're leaning into that force, trying to get rid of technology or trying to converge with technology in order to make better lives for the front that we're leading on as a whole. It takes place 2 years after the events of M3GAN, the first movie, and you're learning how certain things come about, the ability for things to evolve as a whole, certain characters sort of put in different positions, the ability for certain things to come about in an intriguing way, takes you into all sorts of direction within the locations, taking you into new grounds, new locations that deliberately takes it in a direction that I am a fan of, was constantly captivated by what it's going about, while M3GAN, the first movie, kind of goes in a slower, more natural pace. This goes and takes a quicker route within the way it tells its story, especially in the action that's all involved. May not always take itself so seriously, but it also feels centralized in the way that it knows what it's doing. If you have to suspend your disbelief in order to understand what the story is taking, that's something that you'll still be captivated by if you're able to surpass the expectations of what all it is all aiming for as a whole. It's not always going to be ultra realistic within the stunts, certain things, different character decisions as a whole, but ultimately it still can be a fun and wild ride, which is what I had with it, which leans into the aspect that it does have notions to being very similar to Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which I'm a big fan of that film, one of my favorite films of all time, and so seeing it recreated here, while being repetitive in one sense, can still pay into the homage to what all you're getting out of the action as a whole, not deliberately replicating every single scene, but still doing so much to the wonders, to the emotional arcs that you can get out of some of these characters, delivering on quite a big surprise that makes this a solid sequel as a whole. And I'm a fan that they included the lab partners of Gemma, what we're leading out of that. They become more of a priority and supporting characters that actually do a lot more to what's all going on within the final battle, but also throughout the film, because of the position they were left in at the end of M3GAN, it puts them into a creation that ultimately leads them into more involved action that's creating this deeper mythology to what we're getting out of M3GAN. The different humor and jokes that play about along the way did get me laughing a few different times out loud. And while it may not be the big action or big set pieces that you may want to or expect out of a traditional action film, it is grounded within its horror notions and also paying odes to what all action movies have to offer, that I'm still just a fan of what it did. And so taking it into the mix elements, there's moments that are deliberately all over the place. It may have a few hiccups within its plot. It's not overextending its welcome too much, I would say, for its 2-hour runtime, roughly about the same time as what we got out of the first movie. There are certain questions where you could wonder if this story was necessary to begin with, and the time gap of 2 years wasn't fully necessary outside of this small notion that you're sort of showing where the cast is now. But even in that idea, they sort of brush over a lot of the information that's all going on. They start off with a prologue that's information feeding of certain things that are all going about, with Gemma's daughter talking to the counselor, but only for a brief thing to feed the audience all that information, rather than showing and let us relying on where the story is headed as a whole, which goes about this idea of tech that goes and brushes over some of the important pieces that may not be vital for what this particular story have, that still could be informative and compelling to where we could add on to the pieces of this story. What all we're getting to catch up on ultimately feels left out for the matters that are leading on at hand, which cannot necessarily be something that everyone cares about, which also goes on to mention that some of the comedy won't be a big win for everyone, depending on what form of comedy. It's sort of self-aware, not necessarily meta, but in the notion that it's leading on to things where there can be awkward pauses, or things that are leading on when M3GAN is singing a lullaby of sorts to Gemma, which throws off the whole thing because it can stretch on a bit too long. Things like that can be a little awkward in this extent of what you may or may not want out of it, which can throw off the notion that going into this story scope as a whole, while it does have its action, I mentioned as a positive that it took on the idea of Terminator Judgment Day, which can be a hit or miss for some people, not even to the extent of if you don't like Terminator Judgment Day for some reason, you won't like this film, because this film still owns its own identity, but at the same time, it's a question of whether it should be trying to tackle that idea as a whole, whether it can copy those, and certain things that could throw some people off to what you're ultimately taking out of this story as a whole. Which takes me into the negatives, to which along those same lines, this film struggles to find its own identity, even while it adds its own identity from what we get out of the first film. But there's also a question that if this is more action-oriented than horror, like the first film was slower and more suspenseful. This one is less horror, a lot more action-filled. It could throw off the initial audience that was a fan of the pacing of the first film, was a fan of what you're getting out of that, and well, you may want something fresh and new out of the sequel. There's an extent to where this may feel too far-fetched from what we got our original, that you don't necessarily feel like they're meant to be in the same franchise, that this may play on too many jokes that the first one didn't. So it feels like a stretch in a way that goes on too thin within the route that you're wanting to follow along with the franchise, but getting something completely different here, that even though I love this part within the first movie, I love parts of what we're getting out of the second movie, there's a question of whether it will work for the general audience because of the factors of some of the writing, some of the ideas, the scope of the story, and just the ultimate payoff that this film leads on to may just be too predictable, especially as it slowly leads on to the ideas of Terminator Judgment Day. It just struggles to find its identity of being so unique from the original, but also too much of a replica of this Terminator Judgment Day type of film that you kind of wonder what direction the writers were actually trying to blend into, feeling like they mixed the script up with someone else or copy and pasted the script of another movie and tried to add in their own spin on the characters as a whole, which ultimately still feels like I've seen this movie before, even though it still feels fresh in the same way, taking on these female AI androids, but we also still saw that within Terminator Judgment Day, which takes on this weird type of feeling that you enjoy it, but also are turned off at the same time by the sense that it can't do anything fresh, even to that general idea, because of what it's tackling as a whole, which also leads me on to talking about the setup of this film, which feels really awkward and set up in a weird way. And there's certain problems that are coming about within the writing itself, things that are mentioned once but brushed over quickly, that I won't spoil deliberately for the notion of where I'm taking this review, that there's things with financial or timing issues within the plot as a whole that are clearly and evidently there, but people could look over it, and I kind of did at certain times in order to enjoy the action, because when you're enjoying the action, that's where those problems are obviously not part of the situation, but how you get to that end of the story is obviously led on to by a lot of contrivances, plot armor, things that lead on the story forward in the way the writers need it to go just to get things concluded. But there's ultimately the things that don't necessarily make sense in the way that we see M3GAN pop up in the story once again, and the way we get to M3GAN being recreated in her full form to begin with, because of the certain issues that the writers do not answer quite at all. So that's just my personal thoughts on M3GAN 2.0, which I have to rate a simply 6.5 out of 10. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of M3GAN 2.0. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Or is it somewhere right in the middle? Or if you're waiting for this review to decide if you're going to see it or not, make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So that's just on. Make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.